Who drew the lucky straw? He was evaluated. Okay, great. Here's what I'm supposed to be doing. Mr. Cier, you're tardy, you're unprepared. Can you explain yourself? No, Sister Ellen, I have no excuse whatsoever. Sister Ellen was my 8th grade teacher. Her real name, I found out years later, is Sister Ellen Van Zandt. She was about 4'9", a little Cajun woman from Louisiana. And she was feisty. But all my life, since I went to Catholic grade school, I've heard about nuns. I've heard nuns be made fun of, and nuns be described as these vicious, mean women who don't have sex, so they beat up kids, and they hit kids with rulers, and they make you stand this far apart when you're dancing. And I've heard all these stories about nuns, and I've always had this turmoil inside myself about that, because when I went to Catholic grade school, we had these group of nuns called the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. They were all hippies. They played the guitar, they talked about peace and love, and I never saw them hit anybody except Sister Ellen. Because Sister Ellen was so tough, but absolutely, she was one of the greatest teachers I've ever had. But the only time I ever saw her hit anybody was this kid named Mike Ebersol pushed her. I mean, he was 6 feet tall and probably weighed 180 pounds, and he pushed Sister Ellen. And Sister Ellen, all 4 foot whatever she was, she picked up Mike and took him and lifted him up in the air and slammed him against the lockers, and he just hung there just like something you'd see in a movie with his feet dangling. And she said, "If you ever touch a nun again, you will be in huge trouble." And he just turned white as a ghost. And with the rest of us were all watching this, just going like, "Oh, there is a God." Because Mike Ebersol was an asshole. So Sister Ellen was one of the women, one of the nuns in my life that really had an effect on me. And I started writing a story the other day, and I started researching where all those women are now. And I actually came up with a list of 25 of them that I've known in my life. And Sister Ellen was one in particular that I just absolutely adored, because she taught math, but she taught it in this way that made every kid want to know more about math. And she made you want to solve problems. And I've carried that with me the rest of my life, this desire to solve problems. And she did this great thing. She taught us probability and statistics by teaching us 8th graders how to play craps. Okay? So she had a craps table. She would put it out. She'd explain the odds, get everybody excited about it. And then she gave you a choice. She said, "Okay, you can either go out to lunch, recess, and play out on the asphalt parking lot, or you can play craps." Wow. What 8th grade boy wouldn't want to just gamble instead of go outside on the asphalt? So we would gamble it was like 2 weeks in a row we played craps. And it was so much fun, and it taught us all about odds and statistics and probability. And she knew exactly what she was doing, because we just absolutely learned to love math at that point. And even there were several of us, myself included, who years later didn't really want much to do at all with math. But at that point in my life, I was absolutely enthralled by mathematics and by solving problems. And so she affected my life, and I always remember her for that. Another nun in my life, her name is Sister Jane Pitts. And Sister Jane, again, probably the least violent person I've ever met in my life. She ran the program I was on in London. It was a study abroad program by the University of Notre Dame. And while we were over there, there were about 50 of us that lived together and studied. And one night, it was cold. It was November. And this woman, young woman, she was 20 years old, a friend of mine, was in her flat in London and was by herself. And in London, how many of you been to London? Raise your hand, or England. And do you remember, have you ever seen those little heaters they have in the rooms? They're in the wall, they're built in the wall, they're little gas heaters. They're some older flats you would see in London. They're basically a little glass flame, or a little small gas flame. And so Lynn was in her room, and she happened to turn around, and she had her pajamas on, her like a nightgown or something. And it swung around and it caught fire. Okay, so her whole outfit went up in flame, and she was screaming and screaming, and so Sister heard the scream. She ran into the room, threw blankets on her, and smothered and put out the fire. But at that point, she had gotten burns probably on about 60% of her body. And so, you know, word spread quickly throughout the dorm about that. And so we were all, you know, frantic, and she was rushed to the hospital, and she was in this English hospital. We didn't know what had happened to her. She ended up getting shipped back to the United States for burn treatments. But the amazing thing was that Sister Jane had been that hero that took care of the situation. And then after that, she coalesced us into a group and turned that tragedy into this thing that brought us all together. And there are still, literally, this is 32 years later, I think, we still get together, including Sister Jane. There are about 20 of us that are just tight, close friends, because not only of her heroism, but also her ability to bring people together and to take a crisis and make it into something that coalesced us all. And so we're still strong friends. And I thought about this, and I started looking up some of these women in my life that have been incredible mentors, and as Sue Ann mentioned, I mean, really strong women. And I started looking them up, and I sent a letter to an email to the Daughters of Charity and said, you know, I'm kind of curious, whatever happened to these nuns? And I listed a bunch of them, and I said, especially Sister Ellen. And I got an email back on Sunday, and it said, hi, Andy, this is Sister Ellen. No. I'm the archivist for the Daughters of Charity. And she wrote me this letter, and I'm reading it, and I'm just sobbing, because I think, this is so bizarre. I can't believe I found this woman, and she had such an effect on my life. And she remembered me and my sister and my family, and I was so taken back by that, because it was literally 37 years ago, right? And I was just in awe. So I just want to publicly thank, in this speech today, I want to acknowledge all those great women, particularly nuns in my life, that have affected me and helped me to become the person I am, even though I'm late and unprepared.